So the winner and the new WBC and WBA Unified Welterweight Champion is Keith One Time Thurman. Managed to successfully pull off a split decision victory over Danny Swift Garcia. And even though the fight wasn't necessarily a total barn burner, it definitely was a very interesting fight going into it. And there was a lot of tenseness throughout the entire fight. It's really just unfortunate that it didn't really pop off into the full scale all out war that I think a lot of people, myself included, to a certain degree, were kind of expecting. The same way that, for instance, the Thurman versus Porter fight managed to blow up and become one of the fights of the year for 2016. This fight was a lot more tentative. Seems like both guys were definitely wary of each other's power. Not trying to take too many chances. Although Thurman did start pretty fast, first couple of rounds he came out really quick, really looking to chin check Garcia, basically to see exactly what he had, and it seemed like once he wasn't able to really make a deep impression on Garcia, really able to hurt him badly, and get an early knockout over him, he kind of held back a little bit. I think part of that had to do with Garcia's own power as well. But overall, throughout the fight, it seemed like Thurman was just a slight step ahead of Garcia. He was getting off first, and he was oftentimes finishing up the exchanges as well. I think that's pretty much what led most people to having Thurman in the lead when it was all said and done. What wound up having, of course, two of the three judges as well, having him up in the fight. He just was a step ahead of him. He was leading with the shots a lot more. He was throwing in higher volume, and more often than not, he was landing just slightly cleaner. There were a number of rounds where Garcia appeared to land cleaner as well, but it tended to be a bit more few and far between. So a lot of times, you'd be almost asking yourself the question of if Thurman's more consistent work was prevailing in the round, or if it was more Garcia's hard, heavy shots. In spite of them being fewer and further between in the midst of whatever the action happened to be in any given round. But Thurman did a damn good job of just kind of staying ahead of the curve, ahead of Danny. In spite of the fact that Garcia did manage to stun, I think, Thurman a couple of times to the body, managed to at least sting him and kind of keep him at bay. It just really wasn't enough. It seemed like even Angel Garcia was kind of pleading with Danny to try and get a higher sense of urgency and really throw more, let his hands go a bit more. But he just wasn't able to do it. And in spite of the fact that Thurman even kind of coasted the last couple of rounds, thinking that he had a lead and he was just going to protect that lead at all costs, even if he gave the last couple of rounds away, that he had the victory in the bag, and that he was just gonna try to protect it, as opposed to really going out there and trying to make a further impression on Garcia, which I think kind of led to the fight being a little bit lackluster as well. But overall, not a terrible fight. Really wasn't very much clinching either. Both guys were utilizing more defensive skills, in terms of just being able to evade punches with their feet, with their torsos, with their head movement. Which is good to see, better to see than guys making it a clinch fest. And even though it didn't turn out to be a total barn burner, total warfare, I think that there were some pretty solid moments in the fight, in spite of it being otherwise the type of fight that you imagine might be a bit more on the forgettable side when it's all said and done, especially when we start doing the year in review and such. But Thurman managed to pull off the victory. He's now the WBC and the WBA welterweight champion. Of course, the WBA belt, he's going to most likely have to defend that against Lamont Peterson sometime soon, considering that Peterson just won the WBA regular belt off of David Avanesian, so he is now the mandatory for the WBA title specifically that Thurman has, the super title. So since the WBA is slowly, very, very slowly, unifying all their titles so that they have one title per division, it's looking like that fight might wind up coming across fairly soon, sooner than later. As for Danny Garcia, it's going to be back to the drawing board. Unfortunately, I have a feeling that Garcia is going to look to fight another much lower level opponent, as he kind of tends to be prone to do, unless it happens to be one of these big mega fights, like against a Keith Thurman. which is really unfortunate. I think it's kind of a waste of time. Um, I'd really prefer he fight somebody like maybe the winner of the fight between Andre Berto and Sean Porter. I think that's a pretty compelling fight, or maybe like somebody like Adrian Broner would be a pretty interesting fight too. Definitely would be very interesting in terms of the pre-fight pressers and stuff. Probably a lot of drama going on should they happen to come across against each other. Um, of course, there are still the rumors of, is Kell Brook going to fight Errol Spence to defend that IBF title since Spence is mandatory. He's been his mandatory for a minute now. I'm not entirely sure about that. Personally, I feel like Brook is just going to completely vacate the title and wind up moving up to 154 to try to fight Jarrett Hurd for that title. To me, it just seems to make the most sense. It's a lower risk fight for roughly about the same reward in terms of monetary value, and he doesn't have to kill himself to make 147 anymore, and he's fighting a comparatively lesser skilled fighter in Jarrett Hurd as compared to Errol Spence. So it just screams to me overall less danger for still a good payday. Maybe just a little bit less money, but not anything significant. And so that would leave Spence, potentially with the opportunity of fighting somebody like a Keith Thurman, which I would definitely love to see. Unfortunately, it's probably not going to happen until Spence manages to get a title under himself first. So that's the one thing that's really been holding up Spence throughout this entire thing, is the fact that it's like he's been a mandatory for more than a little while now, and it's just like the fight he hasn't managed to get the fight. Basically, he's just kind of missing out on Brook mucking about with that IBF title and the IBF not forcing his hand, basically, which is really unfortunate. Kind of holds up the entire division as a whole, and it's really unfortunate that the entire division has largely been held up by just the lack of a lot of these big fights being made. But considering that we just had Thurman Porter, we just had Thurman Garcia, hopefully that these bigger fights get made sooner rather than later. And hopefully Garcia doesn't waste too much time and is right back in there fighting somebody like the Berto versus Porter winner, as I mentioned before. Wanted to make a quick note, of course, about the co-feature, the undercard. Erickson Lubin scored a pretty explosive fourth-round knockout over Jorge Cota. He is now the mandatory for Jermell Charlo, the WBC super welterweight, light middleweight champion. Lubin looked really good in the fight. Scored just an explosive knockout, brutal left hand that he landed on Cota as Cota switched back into the orthodox stance. Really, he was having a little bit of success as a southpaw. He probably should have stayed that way, but switched back to orthodox. Lubin managed to freeze him up against the ropes and just caught him with a clean left hand. And I definitely think that he's ready. I definitely think he's ready for a title shot. He's ready for the likes of Jermell Charlo. Charlo had a hell of a lot of trouble against John Jackson. He was pretty much being outboxed throughout the entirety of that fight until he managed to catch Jackson, hurt him, and then finish him off. So Lubin, even though he is a bit inexperienced in compared to Charlo, I think he is about as ready as you can be for that next step up. And I definitely think that that's an interesting fight, an interesting test. Jermell would have a bit of a height and reach advantage. He can crack himself, as I mentioned before. He was being outboxed pretty handily by John Jackson until he finally laid him out with that one shot and then the follow-up. So Lubin definitely won't be an easy task for him insofar as that's concerned. I think that Lubin is ready for that fight, but at the same time, Jermell's still a very dangerous fighter with good boxing skills, and he can still punch. It might not be as overall explosive as his brother Jermall, but at the same time, you definitely can't count somebody like him out, especially against a guy in Lubin that, relatively they're just really barely stepping him up to that major level. Like up until recently, he had been fighting guys that really weren't at that elite class the way that that somebody like a Charlo is. So definitely be interesting to see if they do really push him all the way up to that highest level sooner rather than later. Of course, the untelevised fight, Andre Fonfara managed to stop Chad Dawson in the 10th round. I haven't seen footage of the fight, just wanted to make mention of it. Kind of unfortunate to see that Chad Dawson's career is pretty much down the drain. I'm not exactly sure if he's going to be able to recover from this one. He definitely had that tough loss a couple years back. What was it, a couple years ago now? To Tommy Carpensi, and then this one, definitely just pushes him down further. He's going to have to really try and fix some things, if he wants to continue his career. As for Fonfara, he's right back in the swing of things. Solid victory for him. Managed to stop Dawson while ostensibly being actually down on the scorecards. And he's looking like trying to get that rematch with Adonis Stevenson sometime in the near future. Definitely a fairly dangerous opponent still, in spite of the fact of I don't really see his style as really all that aesthetically pleasing. He looks kind of gangly and uncoordinated more often than not, as far as I'm concerned. But he's definitely a very effective fighter, more often than not. So. Good victory for Fonfara. We'll see how his career progresses from there. And that's pretty much all I got to say about this card overall. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Peace.